Hello from Augusta, Georgia, and great to have you, Chris, Klara, Scott. We'll also have Vineet join us shortly. Hopefully, he's going to finish up his other meeting and join us here. Um, but welcome you to the this year's installment of Cyber Peace Progress and what this community has achieved. I just gave a quick brief of the about the work that we have been doing together, spreading the whole um, concept. And now I don't say it's a concept, the reality of cyber peace that we're aiming for. And I think you see the pioneers here. Chris Prenters have been the first cyber diplomat. You see Dr. Shackelford taking cyber peace and the whole policy movement mainstream, and Klara from Cyber Peace Institute, building the bridge between, I would say, the industry and the public policy community to make sure that we are really going after cyber peace with all the might that we got. And last time I checked in with you all was probably a couple of months back when we did the Cyber Peace Forum in January. Now it's not a couple of months back; it's almost going to be a year. So welcome you all, and maybe a quick intro for those that are still getting to know cyber peace and as a topic, as a subject of subject matter of expertise, and a career that they can pursue. So let me kick off. Like Scott, if you want to go first, and then we'll go to Chris and Klara.
Sure. Well, first, thank you so much for having me and having us and hosting this important discussion. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with all of you. As you said, Val, cyber peace is having a bit of a moment, which is so fantastic to see come to fruition. It's been a concept, as many of you are aware already, that's been around off and on over the years since at least 2008, but it's only really gotten, I feel like, some meat on its bones and some movement more recently, right? And we've seen that through a variety of initiatives, some multi-stakeholder convenings and processes, including the Paris Call for Trust and Security in Cyberspace. I'm sure we'll get into some of the recent successful efforts through the UN, through the GGE, and the Open Ended Working Group. Would love to hear your thoughts on that, Chris. And by the way, I've really enjoyed Inside Cyber Diplomacy, that podcast you co-host with Jim Lewis. That's been fantastic. More recently, just so everybody's aware, we've been working on this concept in the guise of a new edited volume called Cyber Peace, Charting a Path Toward a Sustainable, Stable, and Secure Cyberspace that I'm happy to say the Cyber Peace Institute contributed to, along with the Cyber Peace Foundation. And in that edited volume, which I'm co-editing with Frédéric Douzet and Chris Ankerson from Paris 8 and NYU, respectively, we tried to create something of 4 pillars representing this movement of cyber peace, which themselves are incredibly broad. And they include the need to respect human rights and freedoms, spread internet access along with cybersecurity best practices, strengthen multi-stakeholder governance mechanisms, and promote stability and likewise sustainable development. And the chapters and essays contributed to this edited volume try to flesh out that concept as well as challenge it, right? Including thinking through its cyber peace, so broad that it risks being something like sustainability, right? Where it can be all things to all people. And if that's the case, how useful of a concept is it at the end of the day? So I'd love to hear the other panelists, thoughts on that, kind of where we're headed and what these core elements of a positive cyber peace look to be in 2022 and beyond.
Thank you, Scott. So, Chris, maybe you go next.
Yeah, hi. It's great to be with you all again. And as I said, my background was in the government for many years as a prosecutor at the White House and at the State Department. And now I help run a global group called the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise, which is a cybersecurity capacity building community of over 140 different states and non-state actors, including industry and civil society. So a real multi-stakeholder enterprise. And as I look at the concept of cyber peace, as Scott said, this could be a very broad topic, and can be a very broad topic. And I kind of focus on the positive aspect, to be sure. What is it we're trying to achieve? And part of that is also decreasing cyber conflict. So by decreasing cyber conflict, you perforce you increase cyber peace. But simply the absence of conflict is not enough. So when we talked about, I was on something called the Global Commission for the Stability of Cyberspace, and we talked about what cyber stability meant at that point. And stability often means an equilibrium, but an equilibrium is not enough here. An equilibrium, what we have today, is unacceptable. So we need to reach further and say, well, what is it that we're trying to achieve? And I think that is so everyone can benefit from these technologies, and they can actually help societies and help economies, and that states and other actors, well, particularly states, don't have an incentive to engage in conduct that's disruptive, but they have an incentive to cooperate. Now, we are far from that right now, as everyone knows. However, there has been a lot of progress, I think, over the past year, particularly in the UN and the group of governmental experts, which is a smaller group, and the UN Open-Ended Working Group, which is all, I forget the number now, 195 UN countries, which were able to reach a consensus and at least continue to affirm that there are certain rules of the road in cyberspace, that capacity building is important, which is critical, obviously, from my perspective, to get countries into the game, to get them the ability to deal with threats, but also to take advantage of opportunities. So really a wide variety of things that we're trying to achieve. And I thought those two things were also a good signal to the world that you can make progress diplomatically, and that's important. Now, they have limits. We still see bad things every day, and so we still have to figure out how to hold bad actors accountable, how to try to really make an impact on what we're seeing today. It hasn't really gotten better. I think in many ways it's gotten worse. But at least, as Scott said, there's a lot more focus at high political levels on this issue.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. Klara, about about your background and the Cyber Peace Institute's background.
Thank you. So I'm the Chief Public Policy Officer at the Cyber Peace Institute, and my much shorter than Chris's career, but it does span mostly through the private sector, the think tank community, and not-for-profit. The Cyber Peace Institute is a Geneva-based NGO, and really what we're focusing on is sort of the victim's perspective in the in cyberspace. So how we are actually thinking about cyber peace and what it actually means for victims. So really, just quickly to that question about what does cyber peace means and what does positive cyber peace mean. I think it's much more, as Chris said, than the absence of conflict. It's how we ensure that the technology and the ICTs and this competition and collaboration in cyberspace is creating a space where we can enjoy the benefits of technology without the harm. And I think they're focusing on harm and how we can, in that competition and collaboration, ensure that the individuals, and the vulnerable communities will not suffer harm from the use, and focusing on the concept of how we create these policies and how, in balancing those very difficult equities that governments have to balance in this space, how we can keep in mind that at the end of the day, the harm to the individuals should be minimized. So I can if you want, Scott, I can go a bit into the UN processes, and where we see some of the progress in this space. I think, as Chris mentioned, there's been quite a lot of progress. Just to show that there can be actually consensus on something is a huge step. I think it's also important to talk very specifically about this need for concerted diplomacy, because I think it's unrealistic to think that we will really defend our way out of these issues. So really connecting the diplomatical efforts to what is sort of happening on the ground. How do you actually see the benefits of those diplomatic processes and what they can mean if they go one way or the other? It's actually very important, for understanding of the role of diplomacy and actually the impact it can have on the individuals. I think the UN processes, both OEWG and UNDG, have went far. Obviously, there are some obstacles and challenges, as we know that, and Chris is working on this. It's capacity of a lot of countries to actually engage in this conversation is limited. For them to understand the equities and long-term consequences of some of the conversation and decision is one thing. We see a lot of references to multi-stakeholder participation, but we know that, it's still limited. And there's a lot of countries that oppose the participation and inclusion, both of the NGOs, the civil society, and the industry. And these are not just countries we collectively call as adversaries. I think there's a lot of countries, even the ones we are working with, that still have difficulty sort of understanding why why these communities should have space or a seat around the table. So really it comes down to building that capacity, creating something for systematic and multi-stakeholder participation, and really then it comes to talking about how those norms and law apply. But we will probably get to that in a little bit.
Okay, sure. Thank you, Klara. And I think the specific actions that you're taking, especially on the vulnerable sectors which need to be protected, is extremely essential. Probably I'll go back to Chris to ask you one thing. Again, you are one of the pioneers of this particular space. The way Klara mentioned and Scott's now actually taking it on. How do you see? How did you envision the whole cyber piece unfolding into action? Because you've gone through several iterations of making this happen.
Yeah. So as I said, I'm cautiously optimistic in terms of we have these UN reports that were consensus, and the best thing about those UN reports is even though they often repeated a lot that was said before, one report put a lot more meat on the bones, explained what the voluntary norms were in cyberspace, and even though those norms are voluntary, they still have an effect. They're political commitments by states, and I think they can be held accountable when they violate them. And the other process brought all the nation states together. So even though the UN at a kind of a political level had agreed to some of the prior reports that came out, having all these states involved in discussions and be more involved than they ever have been, I think really helped a lot. So that's the cautiously optimistic part. The kind of pessimistic part is, look, as I said earlier, we're seeing more and more violations every day. I care about capacity building and getting countries to understand why this is a priority and doing things both institutionally and technically and on a policy level to protect themselves. And I think a lot more needs to be done there. That needs to be emphasized a lot more than it's been. It needs to be resourced much better than it's been. We need to treat this as part of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, or at least foundational to them, rather than a separate boutique issue. And then the other, pessimistic part, I guess, is I'm optimistic about what capacity building can do. I'm pessimistic we're not funding it.
Right, which is hard.
Yeah, but I think the other thing is, we haven't done a good job of holding bad actors accountable. So we see again and again, violations, and the problem is you can agree on all the rules of the road you want, but if people violate them with impunity, then they're meaningless. And so we need to make sure we do that. Now, that's not easy. That's best done by a collection of states working together, and we're seeing that in things like the 30-country summit that was held on ransomware recently in the last few days, or last week in the U.S. So collective action, I think, is important. We have to make sure we're not escalatory. We're not making things worse. But if bad state actors continue to do whatever they want, that really detracts from the overall stability of cyberspace and peace in cyberspace. So we have to find a way through that. We have to find more collective action.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir. Well, Scott, I think I look at you more as an entrepreneur in this space than a professor, but both are welcome. I would say, when we even got initiated in this space 3-5 years, there has been a great uptick in actually getting more young people take on this full time, and you are leading the charge. So, what is your take on how can we get more people? More students, I would say, even get initiated to this space, because we need to feel, when we talk about talent pipeline, this is going to be a very important aspect of making it happen, right?
It certainly is, Val. You're absolutely right, and thanks for saying that. My 10-year home is a business school, after all, so I'm sure that's well taken. So yeah, we have been trying to do our part to help address that issue, as have so many other groups represented here and around the world. In fact, just Monday we had our Indiana statewide cybersecurity summit with a great keynote from Dan Coates and some wonderful discussions about how, in this case, Indiana's universities, Purdue and Notre Dame, and IU, can help address even just, frankly, the huge need in the Midwest, to say nothing of nationally and globally. We have tried to lean into this perhaps a little bit more than some in a few different ways. One is, I was an initial, big supporter of this idea of a cyber peace corps, right? This was back in 2016, 17. And I'm happy that the Cyber Peace Foundation has done so much with this. I'd love to hear, Klara, any updates. I saw about the Cyber Peace Builders, which looks just fantastic.
That's right.
Through our cybersecurity clinic at IU, which has graciously supported by the Hewlett Foundation and the Indiana Economic Development Corporation. Our focus is on helping critical infrastructure operators, especially under-resourced ones, not only in the Midwest, but in these days, really around the world. And frankly, just helping to address the issues they face every day, whether it's updating incident response plans, dealing with ransomware, privacy policies, you name it. And that's been useful. I feel like we have been able to help, but what I'd love to see more of is us, working together across borders and scaling up these efforts. We're doing some initial work, along those lines through our capstone projects, and I'm happy to note that we're now just about ready to formally launch this. I wish I could give you a URL right now. But there's now a national, hopefully soon international, but so far at least just a national association of universities with cybersecurity clinics that are joining forces, including MIT and Berkeley and IU, of course, and Alabama, among a few others, to offer basically a repository of resources for community colleges, universities around the world that want to start these types of service learning collaborations to engage students, help out their communities, small businesses, critical infrastructure providers in the process. And we're also hoping to really leverage, this association to, as I said, scale up these efforts so that it's not just a, continuing exercise of triage, but we can actually finally be a bit more proactive and get ahead of this problem. Because the demand's there. The students want to help. They understand this is a vital helping profession for the 21st century. And I think it's just so incredibly important for not only academia, but as you see here, civil society, government, joining forces with industry to really make this a much more manageable problem. So thank you so much again, Val, for the question.
Well, absolutely, and I think it's great to see the traction across the board, and probably that's something that Klara you can highlight, because I mean the last 18 months, maybe or now 2 years, you have been going right after those that have been trying to take down hospitals, especially the healthcare sector, and there are certain select sectors, and that actually connects with the corporate world so much, because there is no security, whether in cyberspace or physical, until you have clear lines of that are drawn. And cyber policy now, actually policy in action, is what you're driving, right? So Klara, your thoughts.
Thank you. No, absolutely. I think what we're doing, trying to, the Institute is built on 3 pillars: is assistance, advancement, and analysis. And really, even when it comes to our work in the healthcare sector, the work builds on these 3 points. I'll start a bit with the advancement, which is the team I'm leading. We're really trying to bring these sort of norms to life, the norms that apply in the context of the healthcare sector. We're actually trying to explain what they mean and trying to look at a couple of case studies. What were the acts or omissions that sort of led to certain attacks? And it's really hard to do this cause and effect that one thing led to another. But I think it's important to contextualize the roles and responsibilities of different actors in this space, so they also can be more informed and they can have, more agency sort of to act, and they understand why they're important. On the analytical side, we actually just published something called the Cyber Incident Tracer for the healthcare sector, because we do feel that there is very little comprehensive understanding of the impact. So we're not only looking at the attack, but what was the operational disruption that a certain attack led to. And we believe that understanding, again, the harm and the impact and the operational disruption just can really bring more sort of facts and meat to the conversation about again, roles and responsibilities. I think we also have to, Chris talked about accountability, that we need to hold the bad actors accountable, but I also think that we need to empower the victims to understand who owe them what, so they can also think about how to push their own governments, to act more, to hold those bad actors responsible, to work on resiliency. So for me, sort of, it's the accountability across the sector. So we published the Cyber Incident Tracer for the healthcare sector, which talks about, it really shows you global data for the past year that despite all the resources, all the diplomatic efforts, the attacks continue, and not only they continue, their impact, societal impact, operational disruption is rising. So that's what we're doing on the analytical side. And then on the assistance side, you mentioned, we've done this whole program to help the hospitals and the healthcare sector during the pandemic, because again, we've seen that especially the smaller organizations, they really find themselves, without resources. And we do believe, that it's a collective sort of and a shared burden. So we brought the industry that is willing to provide their, resources with the beneficiaries who may need them together. And we've done this assistance program. And we now scaled that up into something called the Cyber Peace Builders. And really, it's to help those who are helping to build peace. We are looking at a very scary sort of both victim testimonies, but also statistics around the humanitarian sector, that there's about $30 billion a year being used by sort of NGOs in the humanitarian field. We still don't know the numbers, but we know that they are great, they're a great target for ransomware, because obviously criminals know where the money is going, and they are under-resourced to deal with this issue. And really the key challenge to me, there's actually two key challenges. One, that these organizations then cannot provide that support. They are there to support the victims in the war zones and humanitarian disasters, because they just cannot operate. We've heard about some who had to go out of business. Once they've been a victim of cyber attack, they cannot actually go really ask for money, because the funders will not trust them. But I think it's also a huge economic problem, because we contribute this aid resources. 30 billion globally, it's enormous amount of money. And instead of them lending where they should, they lend in the pockets of the criminal. So through this program, we are again doing the matchmaking of resources to help these communities, in the way that they can actually use, because there's all this, there's all this guidance, all these resources, but a lot of times, they don't even know how to use the guidance. If you tell them, use the CIS that controls, they don't know what it means for them. So it's really to provide something practical that can, that they can leverage in the day-to-day work. And again, it's bringing that industry in, which has been very, very important, because industry does want, they really want to be involved. There's a great interest to help these communities. So we provide a vehicle for that engagement.
That's great to know. And Klara, thanks for highlighting the nonprofit world, because I can tell running this for this nonprofit CFF, and then prior to that with Cloud Security Alliance, we have hundreds of thousands of people who trust their contacts, their information with us. And if we are lax in protecting, and always we can, but we try our best to stay ahead of the curve. So excellent support there. And just to highlight that nonprofit angle, we're going to have World Relief, one of the refugee resettlement agencies, tomorrow with us, and trying to help them to support not only the humanitarian side, but also their cyber side, which is going to be extremely important. So thank you for what you're doing. Next, let's move to Chris Payne, sir, about, we had a great discussion about critical infrastructure. Yesterday, we're going to continue to have at least a couple more topics. Where do you see, in terms of accountability, especially leaning on your prosecutorial background, where do you see where we can hold people accountable? Where is policy already there, or are we aiming for a certain goal where we can actually start holding people accountable, not just in our domestic, but internationally?
Yeah, look, it's a difficult issue. For cyber criminals, it's a little easier. The idea of accountability is disrupting their operations and arresting them. And we've known that for many years. Now, we haven't been as good at it as we can be. We need much more coordination internationally. We need more countries to have good cybercrime laws, like the Budapest Convention, for instance. So there's a lot of things we can do to move forward but that path is pretty clear. And I do think, ransomware has been a good study in terms of getting people to work together to enhance that kind of law enforcement cooperation. It's harder when you have one or two things happening, when there are criminals that are being coddled, I'd say, by nation states, being given safe haven so they can act with impunity. We see this in the ransomware case. And that requires action by states trying to convince other states to change the way they operate. And that's not always easy. For instance, there's a lot of work trying to be done to get Russia to take action against ransomware actors, criminal actors in Russia. And then it gets even more complicated when the nation states themselves are the actors. And so there, the range of tools you do have law enforcement tools, but indictments are not likely to change a nation state's mind. They do serve a purpose in terms of making public what the country is doing. Joint attribution, we've seen a lot of that recently. We've seen that in NATO. We've seen that among a collection of countries in Europe. That's very helpful, but it only goes so far if the countries can't be named and shamed. I don't think North Korea is going to change its action if they've been told if people come out and say they do something. So then the question is, what do you do next? And part of it is a diplomatic play. It's getting countries to rally together to put all kinds of sort of pressure on the countries who are the bad actors. But that requires a long time. You need to be consistent and sustained about that. Part of it is looking at other tools you have, economic sanctions, other tools you have that will help move them in the right direction. It has to be very tailored toward the country you're trying to convince to change their activity. But it's hard. We haven't been very good at it. And as I said earlier, there's always the risk of escalation. So let's say one of the tools you might use is cyber tools to disrupt operations or to tell another country, stop, or we're going to do this to you. Well, there's a chance of escalation there. So you don't want to make the situation worse, but we can't, the situation we're in is just not tenable. If countries continue to do this, if nation states harbor cyber criminals so they can act with impunity, that's not a future we can live with. So we have to figure out a way forward. And my number one recommendation there is we have to treat this not as a cyber issue, but as a geopolitical issue. So, use all the tools you have, not just cyber tools, not just on cyber issues with Russia or China or other ones you have problems with, because this is more than just a cyber issue. It's our economic future and social future.
Excellent. And thank you, Chris. And I know you have a hard stop as well, so please feel free to drop when you have to. I will probably just do a last quick round on the next steps, right? I think every year when we meet, we have very clear goals that we establish. This year was different because we started early in January, and would love to do that again next year on the Cyber Peace Forum. I think Vinny's probably that's where he is. He's trying to get this whole Cyber Peace summit being built up. So Scott, what kind of support and help do you need from the corporate side and from the industry that we can rally around the cause of cyber peace?
Yes, thanks so much again for this great opportunity. I think there's a lot of ways, frankly, that industry could help with these efforts. We have, for example, a cyber peace internship program that's funded right now, so we're able to pay our students to go out and work with community foundations, NGOs, other critical infrastructure providers. So would love to talk to anybody interested in helping to sponsor that. And as this national association gets stood up, there's a real chance to scale that up, right? Not only nationally, but hopefully eventually internationally. We're also working on a Cyber Peace Fellows program. So this is an opportunity to really engage this next generation of both cyber peace activists, practitioners, as well as, frankly, academics and even policymakers who are interested in this topic. So likewise, if you're interested in supporting this notion of a Cyber Peace Fellows, please do reach out. I'll put my email address in the chat there in just a moment. I'll also mention that we're working on children's books as well, which has been a lot of fun with the publisher in India, actually. And they're going to be available, for free in multiple languages to help, again, distill down some of these and occasionally pretty amorphous, complex topics for a primary school audience. And we're developing some lesson plans about that to try to get, kids interested, engaged in this topic in a way that if we talk about it just as cybersecurity, their eyes might glaze over like plenty of other people's do too. And then two other things I'll mention. We do have a very active cyber peace working group at the Ostrom Workshop here at IU, which I had the pleasure of being the executive director of. So if you're interested in getting kind of more regular updates, getting a better sense of what's happening on the research side of things, I encourage you just to go to ostromworkshop.indiana.edu and just sign up as an affiliate. We'd love to have you. And there's a lot of initiatives we're working on, including plenty in support of and in collaboration with the Cyber Peace Institute, which is great, including this idea of a Cyber Peace Index, which is one thing I'd love to see us further in the year ahead to help operationalize these cyber peace goals that we previewed earlier this year, like you mentioned in January, Val. So those are just a few off the top of my head opportunities. There's plenty of others, that I'm forgetting, of course, but would love to work with any of you. And thanks again for the opportunity.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Scott, for what you do. And Vineet, I see you pop up. Hopefully, we are all ready for the next event that you're hosting. As we round up and kind of close here, many kind of quick intro and closing comments at the same time. We'll have you again tomorrow, I know.
Sure. Thanks. I'm really sorry for being late because of some connectivity issues. Plus, in fact, there was another event which clashed. But it's really a pleasure. And in fact, I could hear Scott summing up a lot of activities. And yes, we're working with Scott as well to do a lot of them with awareness and also with the Global Cyber Peace Challenge, the Global Hackathon on cyber peace and cyber security, plus the cyber peace dialogues, even the fellows program that in fact we are working. So it would be really nice, in fact, to have a community at large to participate in the discussion with cyber peace. And I'm very happy to see so many organizations working together on the concept of cyber peace. And in fact, we started long back, and now we see so many people coming in together. It shows the success and, in fact, the kind of mission vision we had to create a peaceful cyberspace. So thank you, Val, for hosting the dialogue, and really looking forward for the next session. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm looking forward to add the real cyber peace event, right? So this is just a teaser, I would say. So thank you for that. And Vineet, we'll have you again tomorrow morning, I guess, with Durga and all. So great deal. Klara, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I think, if this is a call to industry, specifically, that there's a couple of things I want to mention. One is really, consider sort of the cyber piece being the core corporate responsibility of the industry. There is larger issues that we can only tackle together, and there's larger policy and strategy issues that, the industry contributes to, but just because of the reality, and I was part of a couple of big industry actors, just as a reality, there's just different focus on a day-to-day basis. So for me, Chris has to drop off, but he said, think about how can you support these long-term policy strategy through supporting organizations like GFC or the Cyber Peace Institute or other foundations, because really, they are the ones who just can take that to the next level and take these considerations beyond sort of the day-to-day issue. So it's really thinking about how you can make cyber peace your key corporate sort of social responsibility issue, and think about how you can make it very global and local at the same time. So this is the challenge. And I would say other thing, just from the perspective of the work we're doing, for example, around the cyber incident tracer for the healthcare sector. We've been in this world, and all the gray hair I have, I owe them to information sharing conversations in the industry and the government. But really think about what other data you may have that can be helpful, not beyond the day-to-day defending, but really thinking about the harm. How you can think about, the impact, and how you can think about supporting the initiatives like the Cyber Incident Tracer, where you can bring certain data to the table that, again, you no longer need for immediate defense or research, but they can really show certain trends. So it's really the contribution, of data and expertise, and obviously financial resources, because, those are important for all of us to operate. So thank you again for the opportunity, and I look forward to future engagement with this group.
Absolutely. And then thank you all. And for everyone here and joining online, this is it. This is the core, I would say the core global thought leadership and actually action leadership for cyber peace. So please support them in any way you can. So thank you all. I'm sure we're going to see you and meet you next opportunity. Okay.
Thank you, Val. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Val. Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Clara. Bye-bye.
And you, Klara.